The exact same train seat in Europe can cost $80 or $367. Same train, same seat, same day. And most people don't realize this until it's too late. In this video, I'm going to show you the most common mistakes that can quietly cost you hundreds on a Europe trip and how to avoid them. I'm Roger from priceoftravel.com, and I spend a lot of time tracking travel prices so you don't have to. Mistake number one is not understanding how train fares work in Europe, and this one can cost you a fortune if you get it wrong. Most people know the fastest way to get from London to Paris is on the Eurostar, and it takes a bit over 2 hours. But what most people don't realize is that these trains use a very aggressive version of dynamic pricing. If I book 4 or 5 months in advance, almost every seat is around $80. But if I wait until just a few days before departure, those exact same seats are about $350. Same train, same seat, same day. And it's not just the Eurostar. If you look at a route like Amsterdam to Berlin, early fares are around $70 to $100, but if you wait until the last few days, it jumps to about $250 for every departure. These are typical examples, and the lesson is simple. Keeping your plans flexible might sound nice, but in Europe it can get very expensive very quickly. Mistake number two is prioritizing a bigger hotel room over a central location. This one might seem like it's about comfort, but it can actually cost you both time and money. A lot of first-time visitors don't realize how European cities are built. The best areas are compact, walkable, and full of things to see, and that's exactly where the hotel rooms are that are smallest and most expensive. So it's very tempting to book a larger, nicer hotel on the edge of town that might be even cheaper. But in Europe, that usually means you're staying 30 to 60 minutes away from everything you actually came to see. And then the real costs start adding up. Time on trains or taxis, transportation costs every day, and less flexibility to just step outside and explore. In a lot of places, you can save $30 or $40 a night this way, but end up spending that on transport plus losing hours of your day. In the US or other places where you rent a car and parking is easy, location isn't nearly as important. But in Europe, you usually won't have a car, and parking in central areas is difficult or impossible. So you're almost always better off paying a bit more for that smaller room in a central, walkable neighborhood, even if it's in an older building, because that's where the real value of your trip comes from. At least until you know a city well, location should be your top priority. Mistake number three is not understanding your airport transfer options. After an overnight flight from the US or Canada, you land in Europe in the morning, tired, maybe a bit jet-lagged, and your first instinct is just to grab a taxi straight to your hotel. But in many European cities, that can be a surprisingly expensive and sometimes slower mistake. My favorite example is Amsterdam, where there's a train station right under the airport. Trains run about every 7 or 8 minutes, take around 15 minutes, and cost about $7 to the city center. Once you arrive at the Amsterdam Central Station, you might even be within walking distance of your hotel, or just a short taxi ride away for another $10 or $15. But if you take a taxi directly from the airport, it'll cost closer to $50 or $60, and it can take 45 minutes to an hour in traffic. So in this case, the train is not just cheaper, it's usually faster as well. And Amsterdam isn't unusual. Most major European cities have some kind of fast, inexpensive train or metro connection from the airport, so it really pays to look that up before you arrive. By the way, if you're finding this helpful, I would appreciate a like. And I've got a lot more Europe travel content coming up, so feel free to subscribe. Mistake number four is waiting too long to book your hotel. A lot of people assume that hotel prices are fairly stable, that you can book a few days before your trip and still find a good deal. But in Europe right now, that's often not the case. If you search a few months in advance, you'll usually find a handful of really good hotels in perfect central locations at surprisingly low prices. But those deals tend to disappear quickly, and by the time you're looking a few days before your trip, they are gone. So you're left choosing between more expensive hotels or places that are farther away from where you actually want to be. The key thing most people don't realize is that many hotels offer free cancellation until close to your arrival date. So there's almost no downside to booking early when you see a good deal. You can always change it later if your plans shift. And in Europe, that simple habit can easily save you hundreds of dollars and get you a much better location at the same time. The best hotel deals in Europe are often the ones that don't last very long. Mistake number 5 is not knowing when to book your flights. This one is a bit similar to trains, but the pattern has changed a lot over the years. About 10 years ago, there was a clear sweet spot for airfare, usually around 6 to 8 weeks before departure. Prices would start high, dip to their lowest point, and then go back up again. But that pattern has mostly disappeared. With flights now, you're rarely rewarded for waiting. These days, especially for Europe trips, fares often start relatively low and then just keep creeping up as seats get sold. So if you wait too long, you're often just paying more for the same flight. For example, these non-stop flights from Paris to Madrid were about $50 each way when booked a couple of months out, but closer to $150 when booked just a few days before departure. And that's very typical now, especially for flights within Europe. Long-haul flights can still fluctuate a bit, but in general, booking earlier gives you a much better chance of getting a good fare. The idea of flying to Europe and figuring things out as you go used to be fun and sometimes even cheaper, but these days it's usually just more expensive. Mistake number 6 is booking too many expensive guided tours. This one is very understandable, especially if it's your first time in Europe or if you're worried about the language barrier. It's easy to assume you'll need a lot of help just to get around, so the safe move seems to be booking guided tours for everything. But the reality is that visiting a major European city is usually much easier than people expect. Almost all important signs are in English, and in tourist areas most people speak enough English to help you out. So while private guides can cost $300 to $400 a day, or $50 or more per person for a single attraction, most travelers don't actually need that level of help. And the better option in many cases is the tips-based free walking tours that almost every city offers. These are usually in English, run for a couple of hours, and you just tip what you think it's worth, often around $10. I've taken dozens of these, and they're not only a great introduction to a city, but you can also ask the guide for restaurant recommendations and local tips along the way. So instead of booking multiple expensive tours, it's usually better to start with one of these so-called free walking tours and then explore on your own. Europe is a lot easier than it looks, and you don't need to pay hundreds of dollars to figure it out. Mistake number 7 is choosing restaurants mainly for the ambiance. This one isn't black and white because in Europe, those beautiful restaurants on famous squares can be part of the experience. You'll see sidewalk cafes on gorgeous plazas, sometimes with live music, and you should absolutely treat yourself to one of these once or twice. But the mistake is trying to do that for every meal. These places are set up for tourists. They often have menus that come in multiple languages and a host pulling people in. And while the setting is amazing, the food is usually just average and the prices are often double what you'd pay just a few streets away. So you end up paying more for a worse meal. If you're even a little bit interested in food, it's worth walking a few blocks away from the main squares and finding places that the locals go to, often on quieter streets or even down an alley. The setting might not be as dramatic, but the food and service are usually much better and often at a lower price. The best approach is to mix it up. Enjoy the famous views once or twice, but don't make every meal a tourist meal. In Europe, the best meals are rarely in the most obvious places. So those are some of the most common Europe travel mistakes that can quietly cost you hundreds, but the good news is that most of them are easy to avoid once you know what to look for. I've put together a full article on priceoftravel.com that goes into a bit more detail on these, so I'll link that below. And if you want to see some real examples of hotel prices across Europe, check out my recent video where I compare what $140 a night actually gets you in several cities. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.